Hello and welcome to Murder with Friends, the show where two friends get together and talk about the darker sides of history. I'm your host, Grace Baldridge, and joining me today is my roommate and also a comedian, Jay Light, is in the Murder with Friends studio. Jay, thanks for coming from our apartment to be here.
Thank you.
So how do we know each other? How are we friends? And how do we become roommates?
We've known each other a long time. It's almost 5 years by now.
Yeah, we met in college.
Yep. We talked about stand-up, and then I said you should open for me on campus. Neither of us were ready to do the amount of time that we did.
But we took advantage of doing stand-up on college campuses, and then we both moved out here to LA.
Yep, and then we started living together a year ago, and it's been great.
It's been a blast ever since.
It's been great, yeah.
And when I came to you about Murder with Friends and doing this show, you requested to talk about John Wayne Gacy, who is... I know this is an episode that you guys have requested for a while. We're going to talk about him. There's a lot to unpack here, so that's what the comment section is for below. If there's something that we missed that you want to talk about, please let us know. But Jay, why did you want to talk about John Wayne Gacy?
John Wayne Gacy has always fascinated me, and he has like a weird personal place in my heart because one of my favorite songs is about John Wayne Gacy. It's a song by Sufjan Stevens, Indie Darling, and it is called John Wayne Gacy Jr.
Okay.
And it's about murder and John Wayne Gacy killing a bunch of people.
Okay, well, how would you sum up John Wayne Gacy in just a sentence or two for someone that has never heard of him before?
John Wayne Gacy is a man who dressed up as a clown and also killed a bunch of teenage boys and buried them in the floorboards underneath his house.
That's a pretty great description, but let's go to a quick clip right now of how someone else might describe John Wayne Gacy.
He dressed like a clown to make children laugh. But behind the face paint was a man who tortured and murdered. He was John Wayne Gacy.
When this whole thing is over, you might be witnessing one of the most horrible crimes, perhaps, in a century.
He claimed to be a loving father.
See, I don't believe in hitting children.
But what he did to his young victims was unspeakable.
It was terrible into this. The smell of death was everywhere.
How he killed those boys for his own pleasures. How could you forgive him?
To the end, John Wayne Gacy proclaimed his innocence.
Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, because you will have executed somebody that didn't commit the crime.
All right, so like I said, there is so much to dive into John Wayne Gacy, but
boy.
I guess we should just start from the beginning with his childhood. And like a lot of prolific serial killers, he had a very abusive childhood, specifically with his father from a lot of my research. Do you want to sort of talk about that?
Yeah, he came from a home where his father was alcoholic and abusive. He beat him regularly. There was a lot of I don't know. There's a lot of daddy issues involved in this.
There are a lot of daddy issues. So he was...
called him names.
Called him names.
There's a lot of like weird sexual stuff. Not sexual abuse, but like sexual related name calling.
Yeah, shame. There was a lot of shame associated with John Wayne Gacy's childhood. He was raised in Chicago. He was from parents of immigrants, so Polish and Danish descent. And he was the only boy of 3 kids. And he felt very close to his mother and his sisters, and then because a lot of this is sort of a nature versus nurture conversation, his father wanted him to be this big buff man, and John Wayne Gacy had a heart condition, he was a little bit overweight, he sort of gravitated towards his mother and his sisters, and then that in turn only increased the abuse at the hands of his father, who would call him a sissy.
And his father also, because there was also an incident when he was a kid where he got hit in the head by a swing set, and he developed a blood clot in his brain. Oh, yeah. And so he started to have seizures and other and traumatic episodes. And that also, his dad abused him on that front and was like, you're a sissy, you can't handle this.
Oh, and he would say, I read a story that his dad said that he was faking his conditions.
Yes.
And he was saying this to John Wayne Gacy as he was lying in a hospital bed. He was saying that you're faking this, that this is all made up. And as a result of all his, trips to the hospital and, different sort of conditions that he was dealing with, his grades totally suffered. So he wasn't impressing his parents in the classroom. He wasn't impressing his father as far as being a man or whatever that sort of meant at the time. He was born in 1942, so we're talking 1940s, 1950s upbringing. There was a lot of pressure that, men are masculine, women are feminine.
Yep.
But
and this isn't like the peak of American exceptionalism, too. This is right after World War II is over. America's the big victors. So there's a lot of pride in like America's the greatest. So you have to be great on top of that. And he just couldn't live up to his father's expectations.
Yeah, and furthermore, just from what his father's expectations were of the only boy in the family, John Wayne Gacy experienced odd, or not odd, but to him they must have been very strange sexual desires, urges, and also interest and curiosity in gender expression. So I want to toss to a quick clip of one of John Wayne Gacy's best friends growing up in childhood, talking about an incident where John Wayne Gacy told him about what was going on inside of him. Let's take a look.
Johnny knew he was different from the rest of the troop. The only other person who recognized this was his best friend, Barry Bushelli. One afternoon, while playing in his bedroom, Johnny shared a secret with his friend.
Johnny had his mother's silk panties and bra sitting in a bag in this closet. I was astounded. I said, Johnny, what are you doing with those things? And he said to me, I wonder if I ever dressed up as a woman, how I would look.
Young Gacy was deeply confused about his sexuality, but there was no one to help him, so he buried his secret deep inside.
So what connection do you think this had to John Wayne Gacy eventually becoming a killer? Do you think that there is a tie-in here from his sexual confusion early as a child?
Oh yeah, well, because there's a lot of, as we'll talk about later on, there's a lot of sexual element to his killings.
Oh, yeah.
And his main targets were teenage boys. So he's coming up at the time, he's targeting victims who were at the same age when he was struggling with his sexuality and unable to express it. And it was already hard enough in the 50s to be a gay man because that's like you're having sex in bushes at that time. It's not open at all. So I would definitely say that him having some kind of repression and being stuck in that age definitely played out later on in the way he would choose his victims, who he chose specifically, and definitely a way for him to get those desires out.
I was going to say it's a release.
Really messed up way.
Yeah, just a sadistic release. But before he can get to that release, he actually becomes, and this is a really interesting element of the story, he's a model citizen.
Yeah.
So there, like we said, there's a lot of shame associated with his upbringing, but he really wanted to make his father proud. And despite all the abuse we talked about, until the day he died, John Wayne Gacy said he never hated his father. He just wanted to make him proud. And so he tries. At 22 years old, he sort of finally breaks away from his father's grip. He starts a life for himself. He gets married to Marilyn Myers, and he has 2 kids. And he starts climbing the ranks of the United States Junior Chamber of Commerce. So this is, can you sort of explain what this is? This is like a community outreach program?
Right, the JCs is what it's colloquially known as. It's basically sort of like a fraternal organization that is involved with public service, kind of like your Shriners or like Elks Lodge or something like that, Rotary Club. So basically, it's an organization that's very popular in towns and cities across the U.S. where they're working. They have meetings. They'll put on things like toy drives or food drives and other community events. It's usually filled with people who are upstanding people in the community. So you got like business leaders in there, or religious leaders are going to be in there too.
Even politicians.
Politicians, yeah. There's a lot of politics that plays into the JC's organizations. Local politicians are going to be, trying to promote and do fundraisers with the JC's, and there's a lot of weird politics that goes within the JC's organizations as well.
Yeah, so we see as soon as John Wayne Gacy takes a little bit of agency for himself, he really inserts himself into his community. He volunteers a lot. Why does he do this? Why doesn't he just sort of stay under the radar? Why do you think he's literally putting himself out there to be a beacon of morality?
Because he's not programmed to do that. He was programmed to be as an exciting and an upstanding member of the community because he wanted to live up to his father's expectations. He couldn't do that when he was a kid, so he had to find a way to do that as an adult. That's why he does things like become a business owner and operate franchises of KFC restaurants. He had some other jobs where he was a small business owner, and he worked tirelessly to make sure that he looked as good as possible to the community, because I'm certain there's a desire deep down that would also reflect well with his family.
Yeah, and during this time, he says that this was the first time after he had his 2 kids that his father ever expressed that he was proud of him. So he says that during this time, from 1964 towards the end of the coming up on the 70s, that this was sort of the happiest time of his life because he made his parents proud. He was becoming more established, like you said. He inherits 3 KFC restaurants in Iowa from his father-in-law, and he moves to Iowa with his family. He starts managing these restaurants. He's making upwards of $100,000.
And that's a lot. I don't know what that money's like. I would love to have that KFC money in my wallet, for sure.
We want that KFC money.
I barely can afford KFC money right now. That's where I'm at.
It's hard, guys. So let's talk a little bit about his abuse of power that you sort of touched on. When he moves to Iowa, he's away from his family in Chicago. He's managing these restaurants. He's becoming high up in the junior chambers. And what sits with me oddly is that there's these community clubs that you were describing before have this really dark side to them that he is exposed to, that I wonder maybe awakened a side of him before that had laid dormant since his childhood. Because in this community, he's exposed to wife swapping. He engages in that with his wife at the time, prostitution and pornography. How is this going on in these volunteer clubs that are supposed to uplift the community?
Because it's just another one of those seedy underbelly kind of things. There's always going to be a seedy underbelly to any small town, but we're talking we're in the a very repressed time in America and in the Midwest to boot. This isn't like, the 60s, there's a time like 60s free love. Everybody's experimenting, but that's all pretty much resigned to the coasts. Keep that in mind. This is the Midwest. This is Iowa. This is the, grassroots people. These are salt of the earth people. They're not supposed to be engaging in any of this, but they're going to, and they have to find their way to get out somewhere. The thing that really struck me about this too is that John Wayne Gacy in this time proved himself to be a really shrewd businessman by engaging in kind of shady practices that kind of I think played into him having like sexual deviant crimes. He was a small business owner who would undercut his competition by only hiring teenage boys to work for him. So he wasn't hiring people who were in their 20s, he wasn't hiring veterans, he wasn't hiring people out of college. He was specifically hiring teenagers and teenage boys, young teenage boys.
Who would eventually become his victims.
Right, but he hired them because he knew he could pay them at a lower cost and make more money on the back end. So he was driving other people to not go completely out of business, but he was getting more business and earning more money through what at the time seemed like, oh, this is a really smart guy. And he was really smart, but there's a screw loose, and there's definitely an evil element to why he was choosing those kinds of boys specifically to work for him.
Yeah.
As we'll get to.
Yeah, well, I think that's a great place to go to our first break. There is a screw loose, there is an evil inside of him, and when we come back, we're gonna tell you how John Wayne Gacy went from just a shrewd businessman with a screw loose to the most prolific serial killer in American history. Don't go away.